שוב לעצרת בהמשך, גם ננסה להביא את דבריו של ראש הממשלה ממנה. תודה רבה לך בשלב הזה. ולפני שעה קלה פגשתי את ראש עיריית ניו יורק היוצא וראש עיריית ניו יורק הנבחר, יחד עם מושל מדינת ניו יורק וראש עיריית ירושלים לראיון משותף. הנה הדברים. Good afternoon, gentlemen, and I really thank you for joining us. It's a great pleasure having you here with us tonight. First, allow me, of course, to congratulate Mr. Blumberg on your upcoming nomination. All the best and good luck from all of us. And now, allow me to begin with you, Mayor Giuliani. What is the purpose of this honorable visit here in Israel at such turbulent times?
It's very simple. It's to show our support for the Israeli people, for the people of Jerusalem, Haifa, all of the cities of Israel that have been attacked by terrorism for so long. We have very, very strong bonds of friendship with Israel that go very deep. We're committed to the same form of government, the same values. But after the attack on New York on September 11, I think we realize even more than we did before just how closely connected we are.
Yeah.
So we just wanted to come to show our support for how brave, how resolute, and what a great example your people are of how you deal with terrorism.
Mr. Blumberg, I understand you even brought your daughter over here.
Yes, I thought this would be a great opportunity for her to see where her ancestors came from, and hopefully it'll be the first of many visits. We'd like to have tourists from around the world come to New York, and after that, come to Jerusalem.
We wish that too, of course. Let me ask you a tough question. What would you do if a suicide bomber would have exploded himself once a week, let's say, in the middle of Times Square? How would you stop terror?
Well, you have to, at a national level, strike back at countries that support terrorism, that harbor terrorists. That's one level. At a second level, you have to provide appropriate security protection on the ground, in this case, in the hypothetical case you use in Times Square. And then you have to have people understand that they have to go about their lives. In the end, we can't go back into our homes and bar the doors. That lets the terrorists win, and we can't do that.
Mr. Olmert, you visited New York right after the September 11th tragedy. Is there going to be a new kind of cooperation between New York and Jerusalem? Any, except from goodwill, any specific project that the two cities will conduct together?
I'd love to answer in English, but I'd like to remind you that I even speak Hebrew sometimes.
I know, but for the sake of our gentlemen,
right.
I would like them, of course, to understand this
conversation.
conversation.
This comment so that my audience in Israel will understand why I don't speak Hebrew now.
Sure enough. So you may proceed.
It's an old pattern of cooperation. There is a cooperation, deep cooperation between us and New York, which has been established long before Rudy was mayor and I was mayor. I can only say that I think it has been strengthened since we became mayors. And we have developed stronger and deeper relationships between the two towns. But there was cooperation, and unfortunately, as it turned out, now that both cities are subject to the same kind of atrocities and attacks and viciousness, there is a new dimension of cooperation that hasn't existed before. And we have here with us the director of the Office of Emergency Management that ran the, under the guidance, of course, and leadership of רודי ג'וליאני, the operations in New York. And we were just in contact before they came to send a delegation from Israel, from Jerusalem to New York.
To work together with him.
To work together, to study their lessons and their understandings of what happened, and to provide some of our insights into what happened here so that both can benefit. In the event, hopefully not, that something will still happen in New York or in Jerusalem.
Hopefully not. Mr. Giuliani, excuse me, it is already almost actually 3 months since the tragedy. Can you already identify the most significant change among the American public and especially among New Yorkers?
Most significant change is that we're stronger and more unified than we were before. I had never seen America or New York more unified than it is now. The terrorists tried to break our spirit. I think they thought they were going to create chaos. I believe they thought that maybe we didn't have the resolve and the strength to defend freedom. And they got just the opposite reaction, particularly because the people initially who responded to it, the New York City firefighters and New York City police officers and the Port Authority police officers and the emergency workers, they were so brave They stood up so resolutely to this terrible attack, saved 25,000 lives. They kind of turned the whole thing around. So now, the end result is we have a much more unified country, a much more unified city than we've ever had before.
Mm-hmm. Governor Pataki, America, so they say, is very close to put her hands on Osama bin Laden. What do you think, if you catch him, you should do with him?
Well, I certainly hope they're close to catching him. And as Secretary Rumsfeld said, we want to catch him dead or alive, and he has his preference, and I think mine is the same as his. The United States...
I missed the preference. Dead?
I think it's relatively clear. The people of the United States stand strongly behind President Bush in his effort to rid the world of terrorism wherever it is. And what's important here in Israel is that the president has said we're not going to stop in Afghanistan. We're going to go after terrorist groups wherever they are, and we're going to go after governments that harbor terrorist groups. And certainly when you look at Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad, they have had the ability to operate under the auspices, directly or indirectly, of the Palestinian Authority, and that has got to stop, and I think the president will stand with the government and the people of Israel in working to make that stop.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Giuliani, would you prefer to see Osama bin Laden dead more than alive?
I think that I'll express solidarity with the governor in the same expression that he had of our preference. I think that there's no question that governments have to now line up on what side do they exist. There's no longer any room for ambiguity about support for terrorism. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the great mistakes that was made was among certain people who created a moral equivalent between the State of Israel and the Palestinian Authority. There is no moral equivalent.
So continuing your idea, you would have preferred to see also Chairman Arafat dead more than alive?
Oh, I think what I would have preferred to see is Chairman Arafat live up to his commitments, the commitments that he made to turn over terrorists, to end terrorism. He made very specific commitments for some period of time and then didn't keep those commitments. Mm-hmm. And that's what I would have preferred to see. I would prefer to see him renounce terrorism resolutely and do something about the terrible reign of terror that has occurred under his watch. And hopefully he will still do that. Then I think people have to defend themselves. I think the actions that are being taken by the United States government and the actions that are being taken by the State of Israel have to be seen as self-defense. They are defending themselves, we're defending ourselves against the possibility of further innocent lives being killed. And nobody wants to do this, and I think we'd all prefer peace and serenity. But also we realize that this is a serious threat and we have to defend ourselves.
Mr. Olmert, would you define Yasser Arafat as our bin Laden, as Prime Minister Sharon is doing?
I certainly will sympathize with the Prime Minister of Israel. I think that Arafat is our bin Laden. It doesn't mean that he is identical to bin Laden. It just means that he is the terrorist that we fight. Bin Laden is the terrorist that America fights. And there is no doubt about that. I think it's quite clear. And I think it's now a growing understanding on the international scene, not just by us, that fundamentally Arafat is a terrorist. The fact that America demands that he will stop the terror, that the fact that the Secretary of State, the President of America, points at him and says, hey, you are the one that could stop it, that should stop it, that ought to stop it, and if you will not stop it, you will be held responsible. That means that they understand that he is very much involved in harboring, in sponsoring, in protecting, in inspiring, and in providing the necessary equipment and protection that allows this terror to take place. So he is our bin Laden, and I have said long ago, and I don't hide it, I want him alive, out of position, out of power, no more chairman of the Palestinian Authority, no partner for negotiations. Stop this nonsense of trying to change Arafat. He is not going to be changed. We have got to entirely cut him out from mainstream of the politics of the Middle East if we want to have peace, because this guy will never sign peace with Israel.
Mr. Blumberg, with your permission, a personal question. You're a very wealthy man, and this is an understatement. Why did you need this headache? I'm sure everybody asked themselves, why did you need this headache of becoming the mayor of the city of New York, which is in the most difficult time of its history?
I think that Rudy Giuliani has the greatest job in the world, and I'd like to have that job for myself since he can't follow on. I'm not taking it from him. The more the needs are, the greater the satisfaction would be in fulfilling those needs. The greater the challenge, the greater the rewards. And I think that I'm going to get a chance to serve 8 million of the greatest people in the world, and I'm looking forward to it.
Was it worth $70 million of your own money?
If you want to do something, you got to work hard at it, and yes is the answer.
Mr. Giuliani, do you see any signs of economical recovery in New York these
Sure.
days, 3 months after?
I see the city having recovered very, very strongly. I'm so proud of the people of New York City. I don't know that any other city in America, or maybe any place else, could have withstood that attack, that kind of an attack. Its two biggest buildings destroyed, thousands of people injured, thousands of people killed, funerals and wakes and memorial services still going on. But the people reacted to it bravely. They reacted to it with great determination. They went back to work right away. Sure, it had an impact on the economy, but it's already recovering very, very strongly. And more than that, the spirit of the people not only has recovered, it's gotten stronger. So I think the city of New York demonstrated that we could withstand the worst that the terrorists could perpetrate, and we're still standing, and we're stronger than ever.
Yeah, Governor Pataki, may I ask you, what would be the best way, the best memorial for the World Trade Center? Would you think the best way will be to build those buildings once again?
Well, I think it's too soon to say. We really have to reflect on it and understand that it is the burial place for thousands of New Yorkers and people from around the world, many of whom will never have their remains recovered. So I think it's very important that we have an emotionally appropriate memorial at that site. It will be a site that draws people from around the country and around the world who just want to be there and sense the horror that occurred there and the loss that occurred there. So I think what ultimately is rebuilt it's too soon to say, but I think whatever is done, it's very important that we have an appropriate and suitable memorial to never forget the fact that thousands of people lost their lives at that site.
Mr. Blumberg, this will be your job. I mean, what would you recommend?
I think the governor has it right that we have to have a memorial to those we lost, but we also have to make sure that that site and that area shows the world that terrorists cannot beat us. We have to go and make sure that the economy recovers for those that the deceased left behind. They have families who have to be taken care of. And for other New Yorkers who live and work in the area, we are in this together. And the great strength of human beings is that we can mourn those we've lost, at the same time look with great hope to the future for our children and our grandchildren.
So you would recommend to build those buildings again?
Not necessarily those buildings. I think we have to see, but we will build a memorial that the world will recognize and that the deceased will be appropriately remembered through. And at the same time, we also will continue on. New York is still open for business, particularly for those that the deceased left behind.
Mr. Olmert, do you have any good advice for Mr. Blumberg as a mayor who suffers terror almost every week? And I wish for Mr. Blumberg he will never suffer terror again, but something maybe?
I may have some good advices, but I'm certain, confident, that his predecessor, the great mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, would have provided him with some advice before he leaves. And that will be a lot more appropriate because this is New York. I can only say that when I came to New York, and everyone was curious to know, what do I think about the situation? Was there anything that I could tell Rudy Giuliani or that now I can tell Blumberg? And I must tell you something. They did everything as very experienced and very mature leaders, and there was nothing that I could say to them that they didn't think of without me telling them what to do. So I know that it may frustrate some people because we always know better, the Israelis. It's true that we do have somewhat more experience over the years on these issues, that we have been through this for a longer period of time, that we have lived through this in a different way than just a one-time event, although with such magnitude that is unprecedented in human history as a terrorist attack. But they have dealt with this in the most, I think, courageous and mature way.
Yes.
And as someone who came from the outside to share with them and to express my solidarity, I left with great admiration for the people of New York and for the leadership of New York.
Speaking of leadership, Mayor Giuliani, to conclude this conversation, I would like to ask you one last question. Can you guess what the question will be?
No. You want to know who's going to win the World Series next year? The Yankees.
More or less.
The Yankees. The Yankees
He's
are
not
going.
Israeli, so he doesn't think of what you think. Now you try him
I think
out.
he knows exactly what I'm going to ask him. Are you planning to be the next president of the United States, as so many people wish
No.
these days in America?
No, I'm a very, very strong supporter of the present president of the United States, President Bush. He's a great president. I want to do everything I can to help him and assist him.
And in 8 years from now?
I'm not planning 8 years from now. I'm planning next year, working on that.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us this evening, and I hope your stay will be pleasant. Thank you.
It will be. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.